Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here with Philip Topham, who's the author of Craft Thinking, a playbook for clear thinking and better decisions with AI. So looking forward to the conversation as it pertains to leadership into the world of organisations. So Philip, welcome.
Well, yes, I'm happy to be here from across the halfway around the world here.
Wonderful. All right, so now you open the book by saying that the problem isn't AI, it's how we think. So what are leaders potentially getting wrong about AI right now?
That's a great question. So, a lot of people with AI, depending on how you think about it, it's either the Skynet Hollywood future or the abundance future. And that all talks about AI as being the most efficient thing, that it's going to be efficiency, all about efficiency. But I like to think of AI as the first tool that impacts our own thinking, our own cognition, and augments our thinking. And so people get that wrong. They focus on the tool thing like everything else, big data, the internet, data warehouses, any of these new technologies have been just efficiency. Again, this tool is all about the cognition and changes the way we think. And that really needs to be paid attention to.
So what's going to be the shift in thinking in your view?
Shift in thinking is really that is one of the things that I discovered in looking at this and why I ended up writing the book. AI came out. I didn't think much of it because I thought it hallucinated. And a few months later, there was millions of downloads. And I said, oh, I better pay attention to this. And I embarked on figuring it out. And so I committed myself to writing 2 articles a week for 50 weeks. I'm now up to article 200. And it was really, I couldn't have done it without using AI to augment myself. I dictate everything. I cannot type. I'm a bad typer. I'm a bad speller. Grammar is terrible. But it really helped me clarify that. And what was so fascinating about it is I got to writing some articles about this thinking, and a couple of millennials said, wow, this is really impactful. I didn't quite understand why. And then I started talking to different generations, and different generations, well, this generation doesn't know critical thinking. And then I started exploring that even further, and I realized the word thinking means so much to every generation. The boomers grew up with critical thinking. They had to go to the library to get the Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever to get their knowledge. There was a whole generation that learned how to get knowledge and thinking by just being the best at searching it on the internet. And they didn't even need to do the thinking piece. So a lot of the craft thinking piece is recognizing that across the generations, we have a different approach to how to get our jobs done and how to think about it. And so that's where the thinking part is it's a simple idea, but it is really impactful across the generations and brings people together. And you can't fault people for doing Google searches because that was the right thing to do. That was the right strategy. With AI, we're going to need a new strategy.
Now, we've heard a lot in the AI world about prompt engineering as a new job, even a new job title. Everyone's going to have to learn to be a prompt engineer. Now, you say that that's mostly a myth, and it's obviously cutting against the market narrative. So, what do you mean by that? Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah. So first off, being an engineer for a lot of people, the word engineer like is gut wrenching, or it's like I don't want to be an engineer. I know the old aerospace engineers had slide rules and things like that, and now eggheads and such. And so it's for many people, it conjures having to be precise. And if you're building a system, yes, you're going to have precision when you're building an AI across an entire company. But if you're using it more as a chat engine, a companion, a thinking, a thought partner, that sort of stuff, you do not need to be an engineer to get massive results from it. What you do need is to be structured in the way you think about it and engage with some intention, which is the same thing I talk about companies using AI. If you know what your intentionality is when you're building your business and what your business is, your strategy, your vision, your big hairy mission, a lot of the other things come to natural play, including using AI.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I certainly, I've been using it since it came out, but I've seen lots of people, that sort of, they appear on social media and say, here's a prompt, so you can borrow my prompt. And quite often they're enormous. They're really long. They go run to a couple of pages sometimes of all the things that they say you need to put into AI to get a good outcome. And it's overcomplicating it, I think.
So, yes, absolutely. Those massive prompts, if you're building a system where you're wanting to take the entirety of your knowledge and create an entire marketing department, yes, you're structuring every single conversation ahead of time. And yes, you're going to engineer all the conversations and make sure the AI stays on guardrails, you evaluate it and all that. But for the purposes of decision making, leadership, other things, it's a conversation. And most of what we do in a day is one thing here in the left field and then out of the right field, another thing. And so you're bouncing all over the place. And to think that you have an extremely structured day is probably not true.
So you do say in the book that speed is actually the problem, not the solution. So why is faster making leaders worse, not better?
There's two pieces of that, and then there's even more to that.
Mhm.
So speed alone, we've gotten in this world where somehow the world is suddenly quicker to market, faster to market is like that's the first thing, fail forward, all these terms. And those are phenomenal, but there's also, I like to think back to a startup book called Nail It, Then Scale It, right? Once you understand the direction of where you're going, the same with what you're thinking, then you can speed up. But a lot of people rush to put in AI into their systems, their companies, their processes. They implement something, it kind of starts working, and then there's a rebellion against it, or people don't use it, or that sort of stuff. And they misunderstood what the two letters AI means. And so I tell people slow down to speed up the two letters AI, ask 10 people, you get 20 answers. So at least let's slow down long enough to get 10 people to agree most of the time what AI is.
And what it's going to mean for you and your company, I guess.
Yes, that's that intention. How do you absorb it into your culture, into your business? It's two letters, but it's so impactful. It's impacting the world right now.
Yeah. And I guess the challenge for organisations too is that I imagine some of the speed is being driven by employees because if the organisation is not providing AI for them as a tool, they're probably using it themselves in the background. They're on ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is they're using. And so there's probably I guess, a feeling inside organisations we really need to get a handle on this because people are using it anyway and they're potentially putting our confidential information into systems we can't control.
Yeah, that's the other side to the speed, the second part to speed that I'm actually going to be coming out with 5 new articles on that because historically we've thought about adoption of innovation, like a diffusion of innovation, the early adopters, the early majority, the laggards, as a very bell curve. And you can go online, you can see every bell curve gets faster and faster and faster. AI, though, is the speed aspect of AI is so dramatic that the early adopters, by the time the early majority catch up, the early adopters are already sprinted ahead. And so there's a competition factor that has to enter into it. Nation states are even in that competition mode right now to keep up with the speed. So companies have to really think through their governance structures and leadership structures of how to do both the intentionality, but experiment with it so that they're not so far behind. And I can't say that's easy. It's not easy, but that need to recognize that you can't control the speed that's going on. I'm going to give you an analogy of it. Imagine in the old days, you could go to the store and buy a piece of software, and you get to choose when to upgrade it. And then we had continuous upgrades, and you could kind of manage it because you could keep up with the speed. I'd say today it's like going to the gym, standing on a treadmill, and somebody else is in control of the speed. You either keep up with the industry or you fall behind. That creates a tension that as leaders we have to recognize, deal with. Otherwise, as you said, the employees are going to take it in their own hand and they're going to migrate with their feet.
Yeah. So let's talk about your idea craft thinking. So what is it in simple terms?
In simple terms, it's just a framework to help you think through things. So the very simplest framework is when you're wanting simple information. I like to think of it as an intern showed up to your office and they have amnesia. So it's a mnemonic for craft. For the context, you have to tell them about your business. What's my business? Who am I? What are we doing? You have to tell them what the role is. Oh, you're in the marketing department or you're in the finance department. And then you have to tell them what actions you're wanting them to do. You're wanting to tell them they're doing accounts payable or accounts receivable and what their job is. And then you also, this is our format. These are our policies. These are what we do. This is how we do it. That could be a particular way of doing something. And then the target, just because you're doing accounts payable, who are you doing it for? You're doing it for the company, you're doing it outsourced as a service. That's a simple way of looking at craft. And that's where most people start. And
Mhm.
that's what I call the three levels of craft. That's hindsight, insight, and foresight. That's the using what we have today, looking at the past behaviors and crafting them. But when you start thinking about the things you can ask of chat, insight is the next level of craft. And that's where you start asking, hey, summarize this, but tell me where my logic bombs are. Where's their unsupported facts? Tell me what's right, what's wrong. Argue against me, argue with me. I'm going to go to a meeting and the CFO is all about numbers. Help me present this in numbers. How would I translate this? So you shift from thinking about the past to pressure testing it. And these are what everybody that goes to college is, the critical thinking skills. But somehow I've seen so many people sit in front of chat and they forget to do it
Mm.
because it's a chat bar, right? And then the forward place is the level of, is the forethinking, pressure testing it. What does this look like if it's 10 times faster, 100 times more customers? And you start thinking like a board and a company, what does my marketplace look? And you start looking forward. And of course, once you manage those three sort of levels, it's all about action. Like despite what I'm wanting to do, there's some level of intentionality, some action I want to get done. That's the fourth level of craft thinking is putting it into practice and repeating it regularly.
That's really, really helpful. I like that. I tend to use it in that sort of insight way a lot, which is here's what I'm thinking, test it for me. What am I getting wrong? Where's the gaps in my thinking? Where does this fall down? So I use it like a critical thinking partner.
Yeah.
And I found to be very good at that, particularly if you word it up right in the back end and they say, I want you to be a critical thinking partner, because you have to move it away from agreeing with you all the time, which I think is one of the flaws of the system.
Yeah, it is. And there's quite a number of people that are learning to use that.
Mm,
I add the future focus as
mm,
well, right? Because companies can't wait every quarter to have a discussion about what the company's doing and
mm.
how it's going. The cadences are much faster than that. We have to start thinking about the impacts and the unintended consequences. Go back to first principles.
Mm, mm. When you've got those five elements, the context, role, action, format, and target, why did you choose those?
Because the word craft is something that people can do.
Mm,
It's not an intimidating word. It's a simple word. So I went through all sorts of different acronyms that I wanted
mm,
to think through, and it really embodied what I wanted to help people understand that they've always wanted to have a hobby. They've always wanted to craft something, and it just resonated with me emotionally compared to
yeah,
all the other acronyms that I could come up with.
I like that. I think it's a very accessible word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Mm,
almost the opposite of prompt, right?
mm,
What the heck is a prompt? I mean, I didn't
mm.
grow up with that word, but craft, that's what I do on the weekends.
Yeah. So what breaks if one of those pieces is missing? So if you miss one of the elements of it when you're instructing your AI, what's going to go wrong?
So you're going to so it depends on the context. And this is where I approach the chatting as a conversation. So if you're missing something, you're going to get a response back. And this is where the human thinking comes to forefront, right? You got your new intern, you told them, hey, we're doing accounts payable. They produce an accounts payable report, and then it looks terrible. And you go, oh, I forgot to tell them it needs to be done this way. That's the same thing you would do with intern. And
Mm,
that's where you then give it that information. This is where you start to flesh it out. You don't need to be perfect the first time. And the idea of that, back to your 3-page document, what the perfect prompt looks like. Nobody sits down in front of the computer and types a 3-page perfect prompt.
mm,
You can certainly test your prompt and then actually do what I've done is have use my craft methodology. I give it the craft. I actually have it score my craft and say, ask me, score it, and then ask me clarifying questions. It asks me clarifying questions. I answer those questions. It rewrites the prompt and it shows, hey, you could have done better by doing this.
mm.
Sometimes I do that when I really am trying to think through things, but it's not always necessary to do that. It's just have a conversation with it and treat it as an augmenter to your thinking, not a replacement for it.
I really like the idea of it being an intern with an amnesia because that really does sum it up, doesn't it? It's or a research assistant, somebody who's very clever, but they just need to have need to have it explained to them properly exactly what it is that you want them to do.
Yeah. And that's where the new tools, as they're advancing, why, as you said, you have to tell the system ahead of time what your pushback on you. And the new tools are giving you that ability to sort of give the intern a handbook. And frankly, that's all it is. It's a handbook of every time you ask a question, answer a question, read the handbook first and then do your job. So the fancier you get, you might have different interns for different jobs and you give them different instructions, but that's all really you're doing at the end of the day is giving them a handbook of what to follow.
So obviously context comes first. So what happens if you skip context? Like what kind of output are you going to get?
I, you're going to get the average of the crowds.
Mhm.
So large language models or generative models are trained on the language of the human language underneath. So the words we use sort of is puts it together. If I say peanut butter and jelly, it's orienting that maybe I'm talking about sandwiches. But if I talk about peanut butter and sardines, it's going to be confused, right? What is he talking about? Anybody would be confused, right?
Mhm.
So when you don't give it the context, it doesn't know where you're oriented. The challenge with AI systems, if I told that intern peanut butter and sardines, that's a ridiculous idea. I don't know why it came in my head. They would look at me and go, "What do you mean?" The AI is not very smart. It doesn't go, "What do you mean?" It's going to give its best effort to give you an answer, and you're going to look at it and go, why did you think I would want peanut butter and sardine sandwiches? It just doesn't make sense.
It's going to go off and find you all the recipes it can find for that include peanut butter and sardines.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine what that would taste like, and it's not going down well. So when you look at your model and the sort of the craft elements, when you see, I guess, the average person or the average leader using AI, which are the bits are they missing? And what do you see as the most common parts that get missed out of it?
There's two things to what you're asking, and that is the leaders that are they're intellectually curious, they're using it, and they've probably gotten to where you're at with using it to ask questions, and they've gotten past just summarize things to asking questions like, why, how can I write this better? How can I do this better? And that's kind of where they're at. They're still, though, not thinking about it from what is it that I personally want to learn or do or get better at doing. And so they use it in a simple manner without building skills or saying, hey, how do I get from A to B and build it out? So give a more example. Let's suppose every month you've got to do a management report, right? Well, the first time you prompt it out, you might put together the management report, but then you might stop there. And the question is, well, what do I really want to accomplish with this management report? Am I trying to inform or am I trying to persuade? And am I really persuading with this report or am I just reporting? And so we forget that what we want to do is really important. So those that are advanced tend to forget to do that. But there's a whole group of people that are still not sure what the system is, and they've either not using it fully, they're justifying why the policies are we don't want it. They're justifying or ignoring not doing an AI inventory in the company and realizing people are using it anyway. They're thinking that I have an AI governance policy and my job is done. And so tend to be using it in that search engine kind of stuff. And when it hallucinates, oh, it hallucinated. And they're justified by saying why it's terrible. And I don't need to spend money building a system to protect against hallucinations. I'll just wait until it's better. And I'm going, really, you're going to give your competitors 6 months advantage or a year's advantage,
Mm.
which I'm going to interject here. I'm going to share a story. I was at a local law firm. We were doing a seminar, and there was a board member who sat on two private boards and a nonprofit board. And he asked me at the end of the conversation, he says, why wouldn't we just have AI be done by the CIO or the CTO? And I looked at him and I kind of picked my jaw up off the floor. And I said, you realize that you just told me you would like to give the wisdom of the board, all of that wisdom and diversity, you would like to empower one person that's living in a bubble. They have their own view to make the decision. And he looked at me and he realized what he just said, and then he toddled off, like, oh. And that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that leaders seem to make is that they are treating this AI technology. It just belongs in the CTO. That's only a technology. And I remind people it's a thinking tool as well.
Mm.
And it impacts the decisions that companies are making and where those decisions are being made. Either, we can explore that further if you like.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So it is in a lot of ways, a leadership mind shift around it being able to be delegated to, like you said, the Chief Technology Officer or CIO, into it being an everybody or certainly every leader needs to be thinking about this. So what do you think are going to be the big pieces moving forward that leaders are going to need to consider in AI? I mean, it is moving incredibly fast. How do you think leaders are going to keep up?
Well, so there's a first part is no individual is ever going to be able to keep up.
Mm.
That's the first thing. Every prediction I've ever made, I've been wrong. It's been faster. That's okay. Every leader, though, that starts is ahead of somebody else that didn't start. And that's been the nature of business forever. Those are some key messages, but also what I do think is going to happen is in my book, I talk about every person having their digital twin,
Mm.
where I tell somebody, just like the intern, here's my job, here's my role, here's what I do. but what I need you to do is help me do this. And I think that's already occurring. I just became an ambassador for a company. I won't mention that who, but that's what they do is they do digital agents that do digital stuff. And you'll have, what I like to say is though the human even and the manager needs the digital twin to pressure test their own thinking, their own ideas,
Mm.
and that in the future, the AI agent should evaluate the human, and the human should evaluate the AI agent and fire the agent if it doesn't do its job, right?
Mm.
To make you better. As far as what's right now, since I wrote the book, there's been a tremendous advance in agents, that whole concept of agents and agency, embedding these conversations into a system so the system does productive work, right? Anthropics with their Claude code, their coding tools, and now their co-work is sort of pushing the envelope on that. And then the OpenClaw, which we can get into if that's something, if your audience is interested, but it's also a beam out there
Yeah.
as well.
It's definitely worth touching on because this is, like you said, moving into a world where every manager has their own AI twin. There's a lot of tools out there. It is moving really fast. So love for you to touch on, OpenClaw and also what Anthropic are doing as well. And I imagine a lot of other AI will be very quick to jump on that too.
So let's start with Anthropic's Claude code. Is they started first with trying to use the AI language for computer programming. Computer programs are language. So, and it's very predictable. If this, then that. And as they started, they realized that it would run out of memory because these models are only, their memory is only so big. So they started figuring out and experimenting to the point where they realized, oh, wait a minute. If we divide the whole job of putting together software into little pieces, here's the architecture, here's the architectural role, and we have a conversation around that. We have the programmer who's going to program the database, and we have the person who's going to program the user interface, and we have the tester. We have all these things. We have the graphic designer. Then it can coordinate all that. So you end up having an orchestration kind of person, and it hands off these to each of these subtasks. They came up with that capability, and it's basically everybody's copying it right now in a different formats. They recently shifted to that same concept to the things that we do on a computer screen with their Claude co-work, where now it knows how to use a spreadsheet, and that was going on beside this thing. But they're breaking down those tasks into smaller and smaller pieces. That's where people are really advancing. The piece that is still trying to be figured out, and there's white papers on it, there's research papers, and it'll probably in 3, 4 months be better. And that's the memory, right? The amnesia the intern has. What are we trying to build? Those are the big things. Let's just talk about the OpenClaw. And overnight, if you've watched Jensen Huang's NVIDIA CEO's keynote, he showed that adoption curve. And it was a line that went straight up. There's no software on the planet that has gone adopted so fast as that. And it was taking that same concept of having many, many agents, but adding one thing to it, and that says, this is what success looks like. Normally, when we write a program, we say the successful program looks like this. It passes all these tests. It does this. But we did the same thing with OpenClaw and said, hey, I need you to do my morning report. And success looks like this, right? And you just keep experimenting until you get to success. It's a computer. It will try every experiment possible until it gets to that success. So if you ask it, hey, I need you to figure out how to take it from here and put it onto my project plan in a little file, it'll try every permutation possible until it figures it out. And then it remembers, oh, that's the plan that worked for success. That just took off. And so every single experiment that humans could do to say, hey, figure out my stock market, figure out how to book flights on an airplane. That's what OpenClaw did overnight and taught us a different paradigm of things.
It was completely phenomenal. We did obviously hear lots of stories about it going really well, but also stories about it going wrong as well. And I do wonder how much of that was perhaps hype. What's your read on it?
Both.
Mhm.
So the bad cases were people not understanding that the computer is deterministic. I like to say that if we give it what the end state is, it's really straightforward. For example, this is one of my fears about not thinking right. If somebody says, "Hey, build me a system for accounting where it's the most efficient, like it's the lowest cost," and the computer says, "Great, I'm just going to figure out how to hack the bank and steal the money." That would be efficient, right? There's no guidelines about what that means or judgment, and so the computer did exactly what we asked him to do. It's like the old projects. The old adage was you can have time, money, or quality. I can pick two. You can't have all three. Some the Project Management Institute now likes to have a bunch more risk and other things, but those three were the basics. And that's where building these systems to me is more about that designing it well and not just blindly running for one thing. In fact, that's why companies have leaders to figure out the gray. The gray is the hardest thing to figure out, is something you just can't program into a computer.
Mm. And I think that's where your craft model, I suppose, really helps provide leaders with that structure. When you gave the example of, the AI going off and hacking a bank, because that's the most efficient way to do it, having structure around what you ask it to do certainly would, I imagine, would help with that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It wouldn't do that if that was, if you had the guidance and the checks and other things, and that's just thinking through the process.
Yeah. So you talk about in your book productivity mode versus leadership mode. So can you explain that and also the shift?
Yeah, productivity mode is back to it's the age old. I've got a company. I want to increase profits. I'm just going to replace people with headcount and productivity mode. The world is coming into perhaps a world recession. JP Morgan keeps raising its risk of having a global recession. Companies fearful will tend to say, well, let's get rid of people and let's do stuff. But then, the famous management styles like Peter Drucker would say, competition is born in the downturns. And when you learn how to expand your productivity, expand your opportunities, and think more strategically for the marketplace and new markets, new customers, new ways of using technology, that you have an advantage. So I think those are the two sort of back to the way people think about AI. Is it a tool or is it a thinking, right? So the way we inherently come at something is the way it's a choice and it's a bias that many companies have, and they don't even know they have that bias.
I think one of the concerns that employees have at the moment is around, will AI replace me or take my job? And certainly we see in the news cycles conversations around layoffs in organizations. I think it was Amazon who put off about 4,000 people recently. So that's what we hear about in the news. Obviously, headlines sell, but it's on employees' minds around, what do I do? Is AI going to take my job? Is my organization going to use it as a cost-cutting model or a cost-cutting activity to get rid of people? Or are we going to be able to use it in a way that actually enhances the role? What would you say to those people who are concerned about that?
I'd say that concern is a societal concern and not a business concern. The businesses are optimizing for what their charter is and how they've been structured. So the businesses will continue to, if they can create a $1 billion valuation company with one person, they will do so. There will probably be a startup that is a $1 billion startup with one person or two people. That's a different business model than we have historically had. that structure is not a business structure issue. It is a societal choice issue of how we structure and distribute the value that the world creates. And so I that is anybody that's a leader in a business, and that's why I do what I do. Particularly, the world has so much second, third, fourth generation companies, private companies that are not the big Microsofts, the big Sanofi, Aventis, the big companies, and they vote with their dollars. They vote with their communities. They have an outside voice in making a decision about the societal choices, not just the business choices. And that to me is leadership.
So let's move back into the model itself and challenging thinking. So you say that the first answer is seductive and dangerous. Can you unpack that for me?
So for lots of people, we've been using Google search or Bing or whatever forever and getting an answer. And it's great. And we get that dopamine hit, boom, we're done. So chat can do the same thing. You can get an answer and it sounds really good. And you'd go with it. And it might tell you peanut butter and sardines is a great sandwich. It's going to be the new Vogue. And if you're not really paying attention, you would agree, go, great. So oftentimes that answer is so well written that you might fall prey to that being the right answer. And that's where that level two insight thinking, pressure testing the answer. Tell me why this answer is wrong. Tell me why this answer is right. Tell me why this answer, the CFO would not like the answer, or the marketing manager would not like the answer, or my customer would not like this. You have the ability to pressure test that in a way that you've never had before. You can have it pretend to be every stakeholder in the ecosystem and get their perspectives and understand what's going on. And that's something that was really hard to do in the past, and it's much, much easier to get pressure test those kinds of things. Now, don't get me wrong, I would still never, for certain decisions, I would never, even with the pressure testing certain things, I would always test where the rubber meets the road.
Mm.
Because and particularly with marketing things, because all the knowledge is based on historical information, right? So it might give you this is the best campaigns going forward. You really have to do the work and talk to people and see if the marketing resonates with them to really know that that's correct, because we're always evolving, we're moving very fast, and particularly with the internet, the memes and other things, you have to look forward, not always to the past, but you can get good insights from the past. Patterns repeat. Global patterns repeat, specifics don't necessarily.
Mm. I have seen people talking about using almost like not playing two AIs off against each other, but using them to test the thinking. So like they'll craft something in, say, ChatGPT, and they'll feed that answer into Claude and ask Claude to critique it, and then that answer goes back into ChatGPT to critique. Is there any value in doing that, or is it going to give you pretty much the same if you just kept interrogating the model you're using?
Let's start with, is there value in it? First off, I often had people ask me, well, Philip, what's the best AI model to use? And I say, use one, start, right? Learn how it works, right? Once you kind of learn how it works, doing what you're saying is a great way for a person to understand the nuances and subtleties between the different models. They're all basically made the same, but whether you like red wine or white wine doesn't really, that's kind of a little bit of a preference. And these models have differences that it's an over exaggeration, but there's different subtleties to the way they're built and what they're good at and not good at. Is that subtlety necessary for every decision? Absolutely not. There's some things, though, that are really high stakes and you would want to go and really pressure test them and do it a little bit. So I do that. Like I actually did that in some of my writings. I gave the same dictation that I had done, had it write the opening paragraphs based on my dictation of what I wanted the open paragraph to say. I gave it to Gemini, Claude, and OpenAI. And then I had them each rank evaluate it. It was remarkable. Gemini said, I'm not the best for doing that. It was the worst at doing that kind of opening creative. OpenAI actually did the analogy better. Claude did the English better.
Mm.
Right. Is that material? Yeah, between OpenAI and Claude, does it get the point across for my writings? I tend to just stick with OpenAI, which catches people off guard because a lot of people like the English from Claude, but you can work with it to get, for me, the analogies and the understanding is most important, not the finesse of the English language.
So it really is horses for courses. Yeah, choose the
Yeah,
right model for what you want to do.
for what you want to do, but for so many situations, it's not critical. It's not as critical as people angst over.
Mm. Yeah, and look, we certainly saw a shift away from ChatGPT when they closed down 4.0 and that whole piece around how it had gotten too personal. And it was, there were people who, as I understand it, were marrying their AI and, developing relationships with it and so on. So there's been a shift away from that into some of the other models. And so there's people out there, obviously, I'm segueing away from leadership, obviously, but there are people out there who are looking for something in the models that probably isn't there. And I guess they're putting guardrails in place now around, how it's used and what it actually does. Do you see this as being going to be a continual trade-off between the ability of the model and also that need to keep people safe? Do you think that's going to limit it in the future?
Great question. I'm a firm believer that all technology that we produce has unintended consequences, and it's up to us to recognize them when they happen and put guidance and guide rails in when it occurs and we recognize it. So just like Australia just did the cell phone laws and such, it took them many, many decades for that to actually come to pass. And the harms were being done for a long time before Australia was brave enough to put on the world stage, this is what we're going to do. Other countries are finally starting to think about it and move in that direction. So the question I think you're kind of asking is there going to be some unintended consequences to the AI systems? Absolutely, there will be. And it will be up to society to curb that. Hopefully, my belief and hope and why I talk about this sort of stuff is that if we can recognize the patterns faster, we can deal with it better and faster and quicker. And that's part of that understanding the speed of change. We can't wait a decade to make adjustments. We're going to have to get more comfortable making the decisions quicker and faster.
Mm. And living in a world of ambiguity where we don't know what we don't know. And there are a lot of people out there, I think, who really want their AI to be sentient. They want it to be alive. They want to be able to connect with it in some way. And there is that sort of balance of how do we use it in ethical and responsible ways, keeping those people safe, but again, without constricting the model to the point where it becomes less useful.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. I'm a pragmatist. I'm neither a hand waver that I'm neither the doom and gloom, nor am I the future is paved with abundance. I'm a pragmatist. We'll probably have something in the middle between those two extremes. We'll always have people that are rooting for AI to destroy the world, and we'll have people rooting for AI to be our sentient and save the world. That's a movie for a different day.
So you talk about in the book that most AI projects fail. So what are leaders misunderstanding about implementation? What's actually going wrong?
So this is AI that we sort of discussed. It's a language model. It's based on decisions and language and fuzzy stuffs. It's a fuzzy probabilistic engine. Historically, AI is deterministic. If this, then that, and there's only one answer, either yes or no. Probabilistic models is yes, no, maybe. And therein is a very fundamental difference. And trading those implementations that way, you have to then say, oh, let me step back and figure out what's going on here. Add on top of that, when you start putting decisions into the company and you don't necessarily have a way to monitor the decisions, escalate the decisions, keep the human in the loop, the human in the room, all these weird terms for just proper management of the stuff you do, then the projects can go wrong. And oftentimes, where I see it the most is the discussion is around, well, where's the low-hanging fruit? Where's the automatic ROI? Let's do that. And literally treating it like just a simple programming project. And it is not that because it has the decision making in the system. And there's all these other pieces, parts to it. I like to tell people, yes, do the low-hanging fruit, but recognize that you need to structure these AI systems different than when you, with that in mind. I think that's really a big difference.
And what does thinking well with AI actually look like when it's at its best?
When you're thinking well with AI, you go, huh, I didn't think about the elephant of that side. I really need to think through that. And you go, oh, now I've got a better path forward. That's really what happens is when you can see your own blind spot and recognize it and come up with a better solution. That's just priceless because you saved yourself a bunch of heartache.
Mm. And time, I imagine too. All
Oh,
right. Well,
yeah. Oh, yes, and time.
and
I
time
can tell you
and energy.
all that days. Yes.
Yeah, look, thank you so much. That's been really interesting. We did segue away from leadership quite a bit just because some of the things we talked about were interesting and it was more sort of out of my interest wanting to explore them. So I really appreciate your time, Philip. So thanks so much for being here.
I enjoyed everything today. It's wonderful to explore with you what I'm passionate about, and that's the future of AI and how we use it wisely.
Wonderful. Well, for those people watching, there's a link to purchase the book below the video, whichever platform you're watching this on, there'll be a link there for you. And also, obviously, Philip's bio and how to get in touch with him. So thanks again.
Thank you.